You know what kills me here too? It's just the absolute ignorance being taught about the Civil War and why the Civil War was fought. These kids believe that the Civil War, the only issue in the Civil War was slavery. And so what we had was a bunch of rainbow warriors from New York, and they came down here and they kicked our butts because we were racist. Or they were racist, I should say, because I'm from the North. That's not really right. In fact, one of the best pieces ever written on this was written by a black man who I admire a lot, Walter E. Williams. And the absolute betrayal that was the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. I mean, the war did. Slavery was a tangential issue, but it wasn't the main one. Let me read a little bit of this to you, especially since we got kids in the car still right now. I want them to hear this because you're never going to hear this in school because the left writes the history books. The victors of war write its history, Walter Williams writes, in order to cast themselves in the most favorable light. That explains the considerable historical ignorance about our War of 1861 and the panic over the Confederate flag, he writes. To create better understanding, we got to start a bit before the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. So we just signed the treaty with Great Britain and, in 1783, right? The first article declared the 13 colonies to be free, sovereign, independent states. So these 13 states, these 13 nations came together in 1787, created the federal government as their agent. Principals always have the right to fire agents. In other words, states held a right to withdraw from the pact or secede. They always did. During the 1787 Constitutional Convention, a proposal was made that would allow federal government to suppress a seceding state. James Madison rejected it, saying any union of the states containing such an ingredient seemed to provide for its own destruction. The use of force against a state would look more like a declaration of war than an infliction of punishment and would probably be considered by the party attacked as a dissolution of all previous compacts. So when the ratification documents of Virginia, New York, and Rhode Island explicitly said they held the right to resume powers delegated should the federal government become abusive. In other words, Rhode Island in particular did not want to ratify the Constitution because they did not want to be a part of something they couldn't leave. They were explicitly promised, that's why they put it in the documents, that they could leave. Virginia was, New York was, Rhode Island was. They could secede. They were there because they wanted to be. We were a union because we wanted to be. On March 2nd, 1861, after 7 states seceded and 2 days before Abraham Lincoln's inauguration, Senator James Doolittle of Wisconsin proposed a constitutional amendment that would allow states to secede. Why did he do that? Because it was unconstitutional to stop a state from seceding. That's why it was needed. Several months earlier, Walter E. Williams writes, Walter E. Williams, by the way, is black. Representatives Daniel Sickles of New York and Thomas Florence of Pennsylvania proposed a constitutional amendment to prohibit secession, to stop it. Couldn't leave the Union. Here's a question for the reader, he writes. Would there have been any point to offering these amendments if secession was already unconstitutional? On the eve of the Civil War, even Unionist politicians saw secession as a right of the states. That's why California wants to do it today. By the way, it's still constitutional to secede. It is. We had a war over it. 600,000 people died, but we didn't change anything. And that's why California's for fighting for the right to do. They have a right to secede. They can go. That's never changed from the moment that we put those documents together. That's history. Maybe politically incorrect now, but it doesn't make it any less fact. Both Northern Democrat and Republican parties favored allowing the South to secede in peace. Again, let me read that to you. Both Northern Democratic and Republican parties favored allowing the South to secede in peace. Just about every major Northern newspaper editorialized in favor of the South's right to secede before the Civil War. Bet you didn't know that. New York Tribune, 1860. If tyranny and despotism justified the revolution of 1776, then why do we not see why it would not justify the secession of 5 million Southerns from the Federal Union in 1861? This is history. There's a growing sentiment throughout the North in favor of letting the Gulf states go. The War of 1861 settled the issue of secession through brute force that cost 600,000 Americans their lives. We Americans celebrate Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, but H.L. Mencken correctly evaluated the speech. It is poetry, not logic, beauty, not sense. Lincoln said that soldiers sacrificed their lives to the cause of self-determination, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish. But Mencken says, it is difficult to imagine anything more untrue. The Union soldiers in the battle actually fought against self-determination. It was the Confederates who fought for the right of the people to govern themselves. Do you hear anything about slavery in there? And the reason slavery was an issue during the Civil War, and it was, and slavery was an abomination. It was a horror. It should never have happened. However, the reason slavery was an issue was because the federal government wanted to dictate to the South what would happen with slavery, and several other issues as well. And the Southern folks said, no, you're not telling us what to do. And the federal government said, yes, we are. And the South said, okay, fine. If you're going to tell us what to do, we're going to leave. So there were two issues in the Civil War. Could the federal government tell the states what to do and overrule them? And number two, if the states didn't like it, could they leave? Those were the two big issues in the Civil War. It was not fought to eliminate slavery. That's not why the Civil War was fought. But unfortunately, the left has cut those two things out and made the war about slavery. Why do they do that? Because they don't want people figuring out that this dictatorial federal government that grows bigger and more powerful by the day has no right to be. And that don't have to be a part of it. We never did pass that constitutional amendment, by the way, saying that you couldn't secede. Nothing's changed. 600,000 dead. Slavery's gone, thank God. That's a good thing. It's a really good thing. But nothing's changed. They know that in California. That's why they're trying to secede. They should be able to go if they want to. It was the promise we made the first states to come to the Constitutional Convention, Rhode Island, New York, Virginia, that they could leave. And it's a betrayal of that and our founding, that any state was ever prevented from doing so. That's what the Civil War was about. But they don't want you to know that. They'd rather you scream, yell, rip down statues, tear apart that Constitution, in the process, destroy that Bill of Rights. That's the left's goal. Get rid of the First, Second, and Fourth Amendments.